everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 4, the extended episode, so technically episodes 7 and 8 of Psychopaths, and I'm not gonna lie, it's been a little bit since I saw episode 3. Because I think I went kind of crazy on episode 3 in the discussion. I talked for a very long time. It was like basically a lecture on Plato and talking about Lavinia and all of that. But yeah, it was a lot. So I don't know if any of the discussions will ever be as long as that one, only because it was about a specific thing I could geek out about. However, this series, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening, and I'm really enjoying it. And so I've been excited to get to this episode. This series is one of those series that I have to block out a certain period of time for, because I know it's going to take a while to discuss. I know that there's no way, there's some shows that you can be like, oh, well, if I give myself a couple hours, I can watch that and be safe. This one, I'm like, no, you got to block out like a night or half a day, because you just don't know what you're going to get, right? So that's kind of where we are now. But with that being said, I do have some comments I want to talk about before we dive into this episode. Geen notes that the voice actor for the boss and chief woman is also the same VA for the narrator in season 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen. Fun times. And it's also Gigan from Yona of the Dawn. Love me some Gigan. So maybe she's not that bad, but she's a veteran's voice actor in any case. And then Shimotsuki, the girl who's scared of Oryou, our wonderful psychopathic young lady, is the same voice actress as Ochako from My Hero Academia. So that's fun. Oryou is voiced by the same voice actress as Ciel from Black Butler, too. And I was like, because Ciel in Black Butler, even though it's a male character, is voiced by a voice actress. And I was like, wow, you have 2 characters that are making deals with the devil? What? Am I saying Shogo is the devil that we're making deals with? Seems to be so far. But I thought that was really interesting. So thank you, Geen. And then Anime Annie talks about that Rousseau. I talked about Rousseau, that I hadn't really researched Rousseau a lot. Anime Annie says that they had been mentioned from episode 3 in a sociology class they took. So I'm like, I didn't take sociology, so cool. And basically it was talking about emphasis on individuals more than the group, which is very integral to this series. Talking about how they believed it was the government's duty to ensure individuals are treated equally. Which is not what's happening with Psychopaths. With Psychopaths, it's not about the individual. It's about the group. It's about the majority population. We don't care if we isolate and kill this one person who had a cloudy hue. We did it to save the masses. So it's very much against Rousseau's philosophy in terms of that, which is interesting because you have Masaoka, who is an enforcer that believes in that philosophy, right? And then Cho is Korean, not Chinese, so good to get clarification there. Sasayama's voice actor is the same one as Ugetsu from Given, as well as Masa from Tsurune, and Kuromochi from Ace of the Diamond. Ugetsu, Masa, I could see a connection. Kuromochi? What? Okay. Although Kuromochi, I can kind of see a connection with Sasayama just based on how they look. So that's interesting. And then Yoshika's VA is the same as Dominique from the Case Study of Vanitas, among other roles. So I'm going to apologize. My throat is a little bit sore, mainly because I talked for nearly 5 hours about another series that I just finished. So I have tea to try to help my voice, but ramble's gonna ramble, right? So I'm really excited about this episode. Thank you all for the comments. I really appreciated them. I want to give a very quick shout out over to Patreon and thank the philanthropy tier for being so kind and supportive this month and helping me do the things that I do. I'm thankful for all the Patreon members that I have, because y'all let me keep doing this. So I appreciate that. But these individuals get a special shout out in my videos each week. And so I want to give a special shout out to Alex Cornejo, to Anime Annie, to Anna, to Ashley Got No Bitches, to Be Happy, to Dana, to Destiny Marie, to Edgar, to Eric, to Kiri, to Loisige, to Matthew Palfinier, to Nameless Monster, to Saku, to Shimoyama, to Sunspots, to Trails, to Translucent Men, to Tyrone, and to Zachiel. Thank you all so much. I greatly appreciate it. All of my love. Yeah. So yeah, I'm honestly, other than the fact that I'm really hoping that our crew kind of investigates this mysterious art student that's possibly killing her classmates in weird artistic suicidal things, making it look like it. Although I don't know how you can make the last one a suicide. I really hope that our crew investigates, but I'm a little bit leery because it seems like this artistic murder spree is going to make Kogami remember Sasayama, and he's gonna be like, oh my god, no, it's Shogo, he's responsible for all this. And then what do we do with that? So we're gonna find out, y'all, and see for ourselves. But I've heard a lot of people in the comments, they started saying they didn't like the extended edition, and I kind of stopped reading those comments because I don't want to be spoiled as to why. I want to find out for myself. I honestly liked the extended edition a lot, so I guess it's just player's choice, right? But we'll see. So we're going to start episode 4 of the extended edition of Psycho Pass. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Whoo, buddy. Man, I'm sorry if this reaction, I was just sitting there like the whole time, but I was like, oh my god, like I felt as if it was just like wave upon wave of like philosophical discussion after philosophical discussion, and I was just like, it had me on the edge of my seat where I was just like, oh my god. And then once Kogami and them got into the academy, it was like, brah. So yeah. Where do we start? I had to put cough drop in because I'm like, I've been talking for a while. So I guess we need to talk about with Shogo. We need to start with Shogo because Shogo is fascinating, and this marker lid did not get on the marker very well, so it's out. We got another black marker here I can go to. There we go. Maybe possibly. I'm like, give me what I seek. Here we go. Let's try it this way. Let's try this. All right. So we have Shogo. It's like kind of blue, but it'll work. So Shogo's interesting, right? He's our mastermind behind this. He is the mastermind, so we think. And right now, it's interesting because he has all these different channels, right? So it seems like he has people that he uses as quote-unquote suppliers. So he has people that he considers to be suppliers. Cho is a great example of one of them. Cho is like, I don't want to do the dirty work. I'm just giving you the means to do it. They are the suppliers that have the tools by which the murders take place, and they basically just use those suppliers to give them to them. Then from there, we have the actual murderers themselves. We have the actual murderers that are kind of the people that they sort of weave into their own like web and everything, and basically hire for whatever. And the murderers, what's interesting that Shogo doesn't seem to care who the victims are. The victims are inconsequential. They don't care who the victims are. Their whole thing is the murderers and finding ways, especially the murderers that have like a vindication or that want to like rebel against society, etc., etc. But he's very particular about the type of murderers that he enlists into his cause, and we'll talk about that with Oryou and all of that. And then there's also the people, the murderers, but there's also ones that are doing it for entertainment. And my dog was not entertained by this episode like I was, so I'm going to throw this toy to him throughout this. So we have our murderers, suppliers, Shogo. It's like a little pyramid that we've created of all of this. So I wanted to go through this opening discussion because I found it interesting. Do I think that Shogo is like this brilliant philosopher who's like just so wise beyond his years? Not necessarily. Shogo is not infallible. He's got a little bit of things about him that you're like, there's a little bit of self-righteousness there. There's a little bit of fallacy there that you're just like, he's not perfect, right? And it's interesting. I don't know if I think that Shogo thinks he's perfect or not. I don't think so. I think Shogo's overall goals are a bit intricate, but he starts out staring at the portrait, which it's interesting that we had the tie-in with artwork and the father and all that. We'll talk about it. But he's like, most people don't mind killing cows and chickens, but they'd have a hard time doing the same to chimpanzees. Well, I'm going to stop you right there, sir. His whole argument at the beginning, I was having a little bit of trouble myself with it because I was like, I'm going to stop you right there, Shogo. So let's talk about Shogo's philosophical musings, right? Shogo's philosophical musings are the idea that people cannot handle killing a creature close to themselves. Which is an ironic statement because these murderers are killing people close to themselves. So it's kind of like, wait a minute. My thing is, the reason why, and I grew up on a farm, we have killed cows and chickens. We haven't actually ate any chickens, but we've killed cattle before to eat. And it is, I will say, there is a mental wall there that you have to kind of break yourself to, because for the longest time, if a cow, when I was a kid, if an animal had a name, you couldn't kill it, because again, that name gives it an identity and gives you a connection to it. It's kind of like when you play Nuzlocke, you're supposed to name the Pokemon so that when they die, you get attached to them and it's more heartbreaking. Yeah, because if something has a name and you connect to it, well then, how can we do that? That's like we don't feel bad when that one pig in the story dies, but not Babe, who has got a name. He can talk to mice. We can't have that happen. So he says that they can kill a cow or a chicken, but they won't kill a chimpanzee. I'm like, I would argue they won't kill a chimpanzee because chimpanzees would taste disgusting, sir. Whereas a cow and a chicken taste pretty damn good. But I know what he's getting at, right? It was just funny he started out with that, and I was like, well, but he's like, partially because chimpanzees bear a slight resemblance to humans, but the primary reason is because they can draw pictures. Now, this part's fascinating because you would say it's not because they look like people, because people kill people, and that's not the reason, but because they can express themselves, and it shows a range of emotions, right? And that kind of ties to the idea of like, when people are like, oh, well, if somebody gets killed in a movie, I don't care, but if a dog gets killed in a movie, oh, it's the end of the world, because that dog's innocent. It had feelings, but it didn't do anything. That's the kind of thing. They're like, now suppose fish were able to draw people, and I'm like, don't care, would still eat fish. Even if we're unable to understand what they're thinking, it becomes harder to kill animals that can draw. Instinctively, our minds would say to ourselves, maybe they have feelings. So there's this concept of them having feelings and a soul, and well, we don't want to kill something that has a soul that seems innocent, right? There's no reason to do that. I will say, it is difficult because having been around animals my whole life, I will tell you that, yeah, there are times you can look at a cow and go, it might be feeling something, but then I'm like, but I'm going to eat you to survive. And it's a hard road to hoe. It really is. You're getting into some stuff where you kind of have to create a psychological barrier there and go, what am I doing with my life? But what do we do, right? Maybe my crime coefficient, because I grew up on a farm, is really bad, right? Which I wonder about that. I wonder, they talked a lot about like the stress. We're going to get into like all the medical things with this world building, but I'm like, what about farmers? Do they have a high crime coefficient because they have to kill animals? Is that a thing? Are people just switching to all soy products in this world? Is that what we're doing? It's a fascinating thing to think about. They show a high value. We have a high value we assign to expression, right? And then he like sees the creepy pictures. Since the beginning of the modern age, society has given up on pursuing absolute values, right? It's not about the absolute values. It is about, it's come to place the relative comparative worldview at its center, which again is kind of going back to our philosophical discussion, because you have this concept of absolute values versus relative worldviews, which is something that, you know, back in Plato and Aristotle and Socrates' days, it was like, you know, we were after like the capital T truths of the world, the big truths. And now it's understanding that there's all these little truths. So it's kind of the way that we view the world and the values that we place inside of it have shifted a little bit over time. And Shogo kind of notes about that, talking about that what we value has inherently changed over time. So then he says this idea that it's not because we no longer need absolutes in our lives. That's not it. What it is because we came to see them as sour grapes and started eliminating them. So he's saying that we started as a society to view absolutes as a problem and sought to get rid of them. That, you know, we're so focused on eliminating the black and white of the world that we no longer value them anymore. We just wanted all the shades of gray, right? Would Shogo read 50 Shades of Grey? I don't know. We thought it's hard to adhere to these values, so let's pretend that such ideas never existed from the start. Yes, that's really interesting. So he's basically saying that the values were too hard to maintain, so we just decided to get rid of them. They were too much, so we don't need them. Get rid of them. Who needs them? This damn skull with the rose is so creepy, right? Yes. And then the Symbol system came to existence. Now, this part of the world building is fascinating to me because he talks about how the system started intervening in culture and art. I really, you know, like I said, I was kind of an art minor for a while, so I'm kind of fascinated by all of this. And so the idea that the Symbol system started to censor art and culture. Yeah, because the art and culture kind of around them is sort of like, eh. And I love the way that Shogo explains this. He talks about how, as we see the busts and everything, that they authorized artists and recommended works, right? It was very screened, very filtered, very managed. And because its decision criteria is closed off as a black box, agony and confrontation, which are necessary for growth, decreased. So his big thing here is that because it was basically filtering and trying to only pick out the best and most valued, what happened was confrontation. Confrontation and agony, which create growth, were stagnated. Everything became stagnant because in order to grow, you know, you have to have failure in order to grow. And if you eliminate failure, then you don't grow. Everything stays the status quo, right? Everything stays the status quo. And Shogo says that any approach that holds contempt for free expression will eventually result in society, and he smiles there, dying of stagnation. So without free expression, without growth, everything is going to die of stagnation. He's not wrong. It's just, is fostering serial killers really the way to go? I mean, I think Shogo brings up some really important points that, yeah, we've kind of, this society has sort of sterilized itself and it's not growing anymore. But the problem is, it's like, what you've done is create the society that's just like dying inside. And so naturally it's going to breed chaos, and there's going to be little chunks that like growths that happen within the system. They're going to get out of control, right? The society can only it's going to get cabin fever. It can only stay in that box for so long, and then it's going to bust out, right? But maybe not fostering serial killers. I don't know. And so, yeah, then we have the concept of Oryou and her father, and the idea that and I thought that it was interesting that when she, like, the whole thing about the nurse telling her that her father's happy to see her and everything, and they put on these smiles and stuff, like, if you've ever had family that have been in, like, a long-term care facility like that, there is, like, a question when you visit of if the staff really care or if that's just part of their job to care. And you can either view it from a positive light, and I'm not saying that there aren't nurses and staff that care for people in long-term facilities, but I've been to both. I've seen both sides of the equation. I've seen family members that you're like, oh yeah, everything's, you know, you feel positive, you feel like they're trying to make a difference, they're trying to be important in their lives. And then I've seen staff that are kind of like the ones here at the hospital in the episode that are like, oh yeah, and the daughter sees right through him. She's like, they don't care. They're just having him there because he has money and because, you know, he's paying them to take care of him. Your father knows you're here, so don't get discouraged. And she's like, oh yeah, sure, thanks, of course. But then when she like wheels him out, she's like, it's a lie. Everyone here is the same. They don't care. And she says they don't notice anything. They don't say anything. They don't think anything. And she's actually talking about the patients. They're all shells of their former selves. So we're going to talk about over here this sickness that has a name. And the idea is that they are all just shells of themselves that don't think, act, or feel anymore. And her dad is one of them. Her dad is interesting. Like, we're going to talk about him later on when it gets brought up. They'll all disappear like the melting snow. This epidemic leads innocent people to their deaths. And yet its pathogen will never be eradicated. Interesting. And it's just like the idea of calling it a disease, but it's a disease called serenity. A form of death that people have wished for. Okay, so we're going to have this thing. She calls it serenity. It has another name too, but it's like this peaceful, I'm going to put that in quotation marks, this peaceful death. Which is actually terrifying, by the way, when we talk about it. But then we get the OP. Oh my gosh, this episode was great. So yeah, we start right off the bat with the art scene, and Ko is right on the scene. And immediately Gino's like, nope, you're not staying here. And what's interesting is Kogami is relatively calm this entire episode for somebody that has waited 3 years to catch a lead. And maybe that's why he's so calm. Maybe Kogami has been so like, you know, restless because he's been searching for clues. He's been searching for something and he's always come up short. And this one time he's able to actually get somewhere. He's able to actually find clues. He's getting leads. It's leading him somewhere. So maybe he's not angry because he's like, no, we're actually going somewhere. This actually is not just staying in one spot, which is that dying of stagnation. It's this idea that Shogo, it's almost as if Shogo has inadvertently, without realizing it, created this pseudo environment that he's talking about here, because Kogami has literally been dying of stagnation the last 3 years. He's just been spinning his wheels, going nowhere, and feeling like nothing is progressing, right? Because he doesn't have anything he can do. Now, he actually has a chance to try to figure out who this killer is, and it's getting out of that situation. So, they talk about bringing in the artwork in the middle of town and displaying it similarly, but we break it down even more. And yeah, Gino's like, nope, you're not in the case anymore. Bye. And then he puts Akane in charge of watching him. Now, Akane, I like this point here where she reveals that she knows about the specimen case. And Gino and Kogami kind of look at each other like, okay, she knows. What's interesting is Gino puts Akane in charge of him, which I get that's her job. She's an inspector. She's supposed to be in charge of them. But I'm like, for someone who doesn't want her to be anywhere near him, I guess the reason he puts her in charge is because he knows that she'll use the Dominator on him. He knows that she's not afraid to stun him, so I guess he's like, well, I'm going to put her in charge. She's the only one in the case. But it's interesting, right? You're aware of the circumstances. Make sure Kogami doesn't do anything stupid. Well, she kind of fails. I mean, doesn't do anything stupid, but, you know. I also like that in this episode, we see, what's her name? It's Kunizuka. She has the makeup and stuff on her thing, on her case. She has that on display this episode. And so, yeah, what's also interesting is that in the specimen case with Oryou, she wasn't really creative in varying up. She was very sloppy. Like, she had this secret lab. There was a very high chance she wouldn't have been discovered, but she kept getting sloppier and sloppier and just like killing girls randomly left and right and barely covering her tracks. And I don't blame Shogo for getting out of that. I mean, should he have killed her? No. But it's like she was letting her emotions get the best of her, which is an interesting dynamic in here, right? So we have the situation with Toma, who we're going to talk about, which is the guy that did the case years ago. And then we have Oryou. And in her situation, she was targeting girls at the school, but she let it get out of hand. She went all Sweeney Todd, and that did not go over. Shogo has seen that play, and that didn't do well. But all the girls were too similar. The targets were too similar. The locations were all, it was all basically imitations. Imitations of her father's work. Shogo ain't here for a copycat. Shogo's here for originality. And guess who has lots of originality to spare? Kogami. But I just can't see Kogami being the murderer that he wants. Who knows? Maybe he's just going to torture him. I don't know. But then you have Toma, right? Who was a teacher at the academy. Now, did Toma create the plastic that they're using? Because they talked about the guy who created the plastic. They were like, well, surely, you know, why didn't he patent this stuff? And I'm wondering if Toma was simultaneously the supplier and the murderer. I wonder. But Toma's victims were all different. They were all different. And there was a, like, black humor that fit their own quote-unquote crimes. Right? There was some kind of, like, dark humor nod to whatever was going on. And every place they went to was a different location that kind of tied to their character. And it was more, quote-unquote, creative than Oryou. Oryou was just imitating her father's work at this point. But fascinating. The protein was converted into plastic form. And it's the same chemical that was used all that time ago. And now I agree with Kagari. Kagari's like, why don't we just get, you know, Ko to help on the scene? He's probably figured it all out. And Gino's like, no, he's completely delusional. There's his stuff doesn't make sense, even though by the end of this, we're like, no, it makes perfect sense. Also, every time that we get a close-up of Gino's eyes, there's like a red tint to them. I've noticed there's a red tint every time we do a close-up of his eyes. I don't know if that red tint is naturally there or if it's supposed to be like foreshadowing. I don't know. But it's always there whenever we like do a zoom in on his eyes. Every single time. So yeah. So then we cut to the training simulation where Akane's like, Kogami, what are we doing? And he's sitting there looking hot as hell fighting this robot, right? On the highest level possible. And she's like, oh, you were fighting it on the highest level in the sparring set. And he's like, yeah, what of it? As he goes and lights up a cigarette. You're like, really? He's like, and she goes, are you really human? He says, yeah, but I get knocked unconscious if I'm hit by a paralyzer. Because Akane's done that to him. What I love about this, he's like, I'm just a weak human. I like that Kogami does not consider himself like, he still considers himself like fallible. He's like, no, I could still get killed. I need to be on top of my game. I use a weapon. I like Kogami, we're going to put him over here. His philosophy here is that he is using a deadly weapon, right? So his philosophy is if he's using a deadly weapon, he has to be as strong as if he wouldn't need it, right? And that's where he's at as a character. I'm like, girl, Akane has the willpower of a saint. She's just staring at him and she's like not being wooed by his like 8-pack that's just there. And so as he lights up, and she doesn't get onto him about lighting up the cigarette, although she clearly doesn't like the smell of cigarette smoke, which I think is interesting. And then she's just like, I love that there's a little, was there a blush there? I want to go back. Was there like the tiniest bit of blush? As she's looking at him. Yes. She's staring at his abs blushing. Girl, don't blame you. Yes. And he's like, was there something on my face? She's like, oh, no, just no big deal. And then she's like, do you have to engage in this training? And he's like, yes, it's me who kills a person, not the dominator. Right? He's like, I'm the one taking responsibility in this situation. And in order to keep that in mind, I have to feel the pain here. So yeah. And so I like that idea that he's like, he still wants to feel, he wants to feel pain and to know his humanity. Kogami is very interesting. Kogami is very interesting. He's interesting because he's like Sherlock, where he's deducing these things. He gets into the mind of a criminal. He's not a bad person, but he has kind of accepted his fate that, yeah, I messed up. I let my crime coefficient get high enough. I'm going to be an enforcer. One day you guys are probably going to lock me up, and I'll atone for my sins there. He's surprisingly monk-like in a lot of ways, and he kind of reminds me of Guts a little bit from Berserk in a little bit of ways. Maybe this is why I'm attracted. We'll see. And she's like, is this a lesson for me? And he's like, well, I don't want to be in a situation where you have to fire the Dominator. I like this too, where she's like, am I supposed to be like learning that I have to be strong too, like you are? And he's like, no. Just like Gino and Masaoka said, he's like, I don't want to put you in the same situation that I'm in. That's why I'm telling you, you can give me the gun. I can fire it. Use me. I'm the one that's ready for it. You don't have to do anything. Again, Kogami does not want her to get in the same situation as him, right? For obvious reasons. And she's like, well, before I talk to you why I want, wipe off your sweat with a towel and put a shirt on. So I'll quit staring at your abs. And then he puts on like the dorkiest shirt. And so she's like, I wasn't snooping, but Kogami says, he's like, I don't have any right to get angry. He's like, why? He's like, it's knowledge you can have. It's like, it doesn't change the fact that the guy's dead. It doesn't change the fact that I'm looking for him. So whatever, it's fine. He's like, my thing is, I wasn't able to find out who was pulling the strings. And she's like, do you think the same guy is involved in the case? And he's like, well, I don't know yet, but we need to look into it. It's worth it. And he's like, well, I don't want to cause Gino trouble, so we'll just, find a good pretext to create a situation where they would need us back. I like that basically he says, well, yeah, Gino doesn't want us to get on the case, and that's great and everything, but what if we were needed? He's such a bad influence. He's got like a little shoulder devil, and Akane's like, I don't know. Akane is also very clinical. Again, we've talked about this in previous episodes, but I think Akane is able to keep her hue and her mentality in check because she kind of has like a serial killer mentality where nothing phases her, where she's not affected. She's just like, she sees these bodies, she's like, oh, that was really gross, but oh well. And like, she instantly gets over it. And I'm like, I don't know if Shogo finds out about her, he might find her to be the most interesting one because she's not really affected by things. And she's so curious that might be used like against her. And so then she asks about Sasayama. What was he like? And he's like, oh, well, he was a womanizer. And I like that when he says that Karanamori and Kunozuka were like targeted by him. They flogged him and beat him up. And he's like, he went to the house, a guy who got flagged by Hugh Check. And we stopped and we saw that the woman he was trying to abuse was in there. He about killed him. And even though I stopped him, because I was an inspector, I thought he was an amusing guy. So yeah, he makes a big point there of saying that he only stopped him because it was his duty as an inspector. But he found Sasayama amusing. There's a big similarity there to a character in Bungo Stray Dogs named Dazai. And Dazai gets confronted by a villain in one episode. And the villain's like, oh, well, these sinners need to pay the price. And these sinners need to die. And Dazai's like, well, the sinners are the most interesting people. Like, they're just humans. So I don't know if I agree with you on that. And that's kind of the vibe I get from Kogami, where he's like, he knew that Sasayama had done wrong. Like, we don't know what Sasayama's crimes were to become an enforcer, but they talk about him having a short temper, which is probably more than likely leading to it. But he's like, I know that as an inspector, I wasn't supposed to find people like him to be amusing, but I did. He was just a guy. He had his faults, but who he was overrid those faults up until the end. Now, is that to say that, all the people who commit crimes are saints and we should like them? No, absolutely not, right? I think we've seen enough twisted murders in this series so far to think that, yeah, maybe we shouldn't just want to go have tea with Oryou. Maybe not. But I do think that it's interesting that Kogami points out that there are a lot of people in this world who would be labeled as criminals that are actually very interesting people that are worth knowing and have value, right? And I feel like that's kind of like projecting himself onto Akane without him realizing it, because as he's talking about this, it's like, well, here's Kogami, who's an enforcer too, that has his faults, but yet is somebody that Akane finds interesting. So there we go. And he asks if she saw a picture of the body, and she says yes. And he said it was placed under a holographic illusion. And he's like, do you know what it was for? It was an ad by a pharmaceutical company. Safe stress care, taking you to a world without suffering. So there's an overarching message with all of this, that Shogo has this thing about safe stress care. There's an overarching message that's going to go over here to this whole disease about serenity. And I wonder if maybe the whole reason Shogo found Oryou as a potential target is through her father, who he could connect to because of the disease. I'm fascinated by this, but he seems like he has a connection, and so did Toma, of that. So, And then he says, analysis showed that before Sasayama was turned into a specimen, he was dismembered while he was still alive. And yeah, Kogami gets mad at that, and he's like, nobody deserves that. And the message was that life is nothing but suffering. So in that sense, that seemed to be the message that Toma was sending about Sasayama, is that life is suffering. Now, that doesn't exactly match the messages of the other victims, so it seems to be directly targeted at Sasayama. So I'd be curious, again, we don't know a lot about Sasayama, just that Kogami liked him and he was his partner. And he feels mad that he was literally mutilated alive, which would be mad too. I wanted the guy who did that to Sasayama to meet the same end. And once I started feeling that way, my career as an inspector was over. Because yeah, the whole thing about Kogami is that once he started wanting revenge, by starting to want revenge, that led him down that path where he could no longer be an inspector. His crime coefficient never went down again. Now, Akane, again, like we said, she's pretty chill all the time. It would take something like Masaoka dying or something to maybe get her to be in the same mindset, but... And then Akane's like, do you have any regrets? And he says, I don't regret my actions, but I just wanted to solve the case. I think that's interesting too. Her asking if he had any regrets. And he's like, only that I couldn't solve the case. And she's like, what do we do with that? Right? Which again is interesting. And she doesn't wholesale out. He's like, that's the only problem. And so I wonder if Akane is going to try, if she's going to be like, well, let me help you solve this case and get closure so that you don't have to like have that feeling of wanting revenge anymore. Can your crime coefficient go down if that's the case? Don't know. And she's like, the accomplice who helped him 3 years ago seems to be the same one that we're using now. And he's like, it's pretty blurry, but here's this. I was waiting for her to get to go into the conspiracy theory room, but no, he goes in there without her and brings back the photo of Makishima. That was the file name. Meanwhile, we go back to this one girl, and she's been the one we've been following throughout all this, and her friend is telling her about Yoshika being absent from school since yesterday. And clearly she's like, the one girl is trying to pass off that she's not concerned when she obviously is. I like the moment she has with Kunazuka later. And she's like, all these students are absent from class. What do we do about it? And so the thing is, when she sent her to go talk to Oryou, I thought she was trying to flush her out. That's what I thought. And I was like, wait, what? But the truth of the matter is she had no idea. Now, meanwhile, we cut to Oryou's room, and it's just covered in portraits of her father of dismembered bodies. No big deal. And the fact that she slept with the corpse, what do we do with that? Like, what? Like, girl has messed up a bit. And so then we go back and she says the quote, like pulls the rug up. She says, there's this quote from Kierkegaard that my father liked, because man is superior to animals. In other words, because man is the self and spirit, man can be in despair. And it's like, we talked about morality and mortality science and all of that last episode, and the idea that unless you know despair, you cannot know hope. So again, it's like this cycle of, in order to have hope, in order to have growth and hope, you have to also have despair. And one leads to the other, right? It does not surprise me at all that that's why Shogo was, all about her. I thought for a hot second that Shogo was in bed with her. I was about to really like, here's where my thought process was. I'm like, Shogo hitting on Kogami? Sure, great. Shogo being in bed with this minor girl? I was like, oh, hell no. How dare you? Luckily, it wasn't that case. It wasn't the case. And then for a hot second, I thought it was her dad. And I was like, this episode has got me thinking some messed up stuff. But no, it was the girl instead. So what's interesting is that she says that her father used dismembered bodies as subjects in his paintings because they symbolize the contradictory nature of the self. That she's like, I had great respect for my father. He was aware of his obligation as an artist and focused intently on using his creations to enlighten people. And she's like, I think even now he was indeed a great artist. Especially because of that, I can't forgive him for abandoning that duty halfway through. Yep. And she's like, her father had died yesterday, and he's been as good as dead for a while now, though. But his heart finally gave in. So, yeah. So she's like, but I'm okay. I'm not sad. Not at all. I'm going to carry out his will with you all instead, so it'll be fine. Oh, my God. Nope. She's like, right, Yoshika. So basically, yes, we're talking about, she said that her father's art was supposed to bring to light the duality of self and make people think about things. So then we cut to the mansion where this ends up at. It took me forever to figure out where the hell they were and why this was significant, but it's Shogo talking to this guy. It reminds me of the Hounds of Baskerville, which is a Sherlock Holmes story, right? Reminds me of like a modern twist to that. So yeah, he goes to this hunter's house, and it's Eustress deficiency cerebral infarction. Right? So that has its technical name. It's a Eustress, which is, eustress, literally, deficiency cerebral infarction. Which sounds like the most scientific thing. I like it being called serenity. I think that's an interesting way to like paraphrase it. And so he says, it's not the illness's official name. Of course not. It's said to be the real cause of most deaths that are declared as heart failure from an unknown cause. And he's like, well, they say it's a side effect of excessive stress care. So yeah, too much. He's like, for some time it's been understood that moderate stress. So then he goes and talks about moderate stress having its benefits. Like it can jumpstart your immune system. It can like stimulate your survival instinct, etc., etc. Like it is relevant and it stimulates your immune system. It helps in certain ways and means. It's a motivation in your life. So what he describes it as that stress is a motivator. And maybe that's why he got kind of like disinterested in Oryou. She was no longer stressed. She got too complacent and stagnant in the murders. They were no longer original. They were too boring and she was getting too complacent with it. And he's like, oh, you're no fun. And that kind of ties back to Mito. Mito was the same way. Mito was, just killing off the same avatars and doing the same thing. And he's like, well, that's not fun. That's not what I'm looking for. I want something else. You all don't have a reason for living anymore. Once psychopath checks became routine, then people's sense of stress has been numbed so much that patients can't even recognize stimulation itself starting appearing. And once that happens, they're just the same as living corpses. Their autonomic nervous system stops functioning on its own, and their vital functions shut down. It's very sad. Like the guy said, it's very sad. Like that's not going to happen to them, right? Not me and you, buddy. Basically. So yeah, it's this idea that too much stress care turns you into a vegetable. If you live inside the bubble, you will eventually become the bubble until you burst. Essentially. So there's something definitely to say to it. Again, should this be a warrant to create murderers? I don't know. He says humans care for themselves to the point they're actually regressing. And he's like, life expectancy isn't as long as it used to be, even though medicine's advanced. And I like this one guy's, they're just chit-chatting it up. It's like, well, that's not surprising. Everything that could be called for a reason for living has died out. No one tries to talk seriously about what life should be like anymore. And again, there is some creepy, like, 1984 undertones of becoming too complacent with society and it leading to society not advancing. People, like, there's some weird ties to, like, modern life where we don't really talk about what we're looking forward to. It's like, it's very depressing at times and it kind of feels real. And I'm like, ugh, this is getting into an uncomfortable place. And they're like, the father of the girl I mentioned earlier had the deficiency as well. And then we see him, like, as he passes there. He was a genius in drawing cruel, vivid nightmares using a girl's body as motifs. But he was a man of strict morality. And then he says it's not uncommon for there to be a disconnect between the creator and the impression their creations give. Yeah, what I think of all the time is, like, you see somebody like David Lynch, who just seems like the nicest person in the world, and then he's making stuff like Twin Peaks that's, like, messed up beyond all compare, and you're like, wait, what? Like, Walk with Fire, you know? Or you have, like, for example, Stephen King. Stephen King is, like, the most nonchalant, unthreatening person, but then he writes these messed up stories, and you're like, what? How? There is definitely, I feel like, a lot of people that seem quite normal, and they write the craziest stuff, but it's a distinction between the artist and the self. Right? There is a distinction there. Or you can no longer distinguish that. She's like gone full on in and believes the paintings and are incorporating them to reality. It seemed like her father was not doing that. He was separating reality from the painting. He could separate reality from the art. She's to the point where she cannot separate reality from the art. Her father was not bringing dead girls into his bedroom and dismembering them. He was just painting it. But that's not really what he wanted to do. It was just he was making a statement to teach people through his art. She's taken it to the extreme, to the level where it's real. And that's, Shogo's like, I don't know, the common sense, the ability to reason, and goodwill that can control that cruelty. He defined his creation activities as enlightening people about that. And she's kind of just going above and beyond to the extreme. But the spread of psychopath assessments ended the role that he decided for himself. And he talks about how he was happy about it, that he was glad that mental health can be, maintained through machine assessments. And how, what's interesting is he also talks about, like, the technology that he wanted ended up making him lose the meaning of life that he had been, like, trying to illustrate through his paintings. And the idea that people can become obsessed with stress care and become addicted to it. Crazy, right? Crazy talk. And then I like the one guy, this 100 dude whose eyes are, like, unnaturally just staring, like they don't move and they're unblinking and huge. Talks about artists were only concerned about fame and wealth. And Shogo's like, well, not all of them are like that. And says you could call it an addiction to the stress care. And as a result, he became a living corpse who couldn't even sit up on a bed. I love this line, though, where he says he was killed twice. His talent was killed by science and technology, and then his soul was killed by society. I love that line. That line is amazing. So yeah, and he's like, so is this girl committing crimes to get revenge for her father? And he's like, well, I don't know. He's like, I hope she finds some meaning beyond revenge, though. Yeah, and that's the problem, is that she doesn't. That's the thing. For Shogo, she didn't see any meaning beyond just basic revenge. And that's the same way with Mito. Both of these people, he was like, well, maybe you could be more brilliant than I think you can. And neither of them, they just were out for revenge, and that was it. And he's like, that's not good enough. Not for him. So they go down to the lab. Feels very Neon Genesis. And Cho shows the liquid and everything, and basically is like, well, I don't have a reason to complain. I'm just getting paid to do this job. And then the girl asks, where does Mr. Makishima get a mysterious thing like this? And he said, well, there were leftover stockpiles from past festivities. She started asking too many questions, too, like, where did he get this stuff? And what was his motivation? And who are his connections? And Cho's like, girl, you don't ask questions like this. That's not what you should be talking about. And she's like, he's like, they all gather around him, all of these monsters that just want to see entertainment through the deaths that happen. She says, you guys prepare the toys, and we, the mischievous children, use those toys to shake up society. It really is fun, isn't it? And he's like, well, for us, the toy dealers, just enjoying what you brats do is good enough. We don't have to take part in it. And she tells him to pay attention to the news to see the fact. Okay, can we talk about the world building here? The fact that he can turn into not only his clothes like the girl, but her voice, the voice and the face and everything can look like the girl too. Which he's a hacker, so that might not be for everybody, but he's a hacker, so of course he can make himself look like that. Still though, that's insane to me. Like, I get he's a hacker, so that's probably why he's able to do that, but that's still crazy. Like, that opens up a whole can of worms, right? Because during this episode, they all kept saying he was the killer when it was a woman the whole time, and the accomplice looks like a woman on the scene, but is in fact Cho. So it's just, oh my gosh. It's insanity, right? Yeah, and says, you always leave before the really fun stuff begins. And he's like, he tells her and says, I don't do well around blood and stuff. He's like, I don't want to be implicated. Shogo might kill me too. And then we see the second body. All right. I was trying to see where exactly this episode ended off at, right? And that's when the other girl shows up to ask. And then, damn, here's the thing. This is the sloppy thing, right? Because Oryou was still working on that damn painting of the girl. Still working on the painting of her. And when the friend shows up, it's like, I don't know if I'd still be working on that same damn painting. I would have found a new one. But then the girl sees the friend with the head cut off and is like, oh, that seems a bit creepy. That seems a bit suspicious in this school where these girls have gone missing. And then Oryou became like Sweeney Todd and was like, yoink, I'm gonna drug you and kill you. And I was like, what? I was like, she kind of just screwed herself, right? She got too cocky. And she took her there and said, it makes me want to cry. And then, yeah, she kills the other girl there. And that's where it ends. Okay. So I've been trying to figure out like where exactly the episodes transition. And the good news about this series is I really like the extended episodes. I think they flow together pretty well. But when you're trying to figure out exactly where the second part, you know, the first part ends, second part begins, this part where they're all talking to each other over the phone does show that this is where the second episode 8 starts. Now, what's interesting is there's a network here and there's different voice signals and they're trying to connect. Is this what Shogo is looking at? Is Shogo looking at who's talking and figuring out who is who? Are they going to be able to use that data that they've gained from this to use against them? I feel like they are, because they're talking about voice signals, activity and alerts, all of that. Yeah. I feel like, yeah, Shogo was listening to all of this. Oh my God. Shogo was listening to all about the prime suspect, about the specimen casework. Oh my God. He was listening to the whole thing. So he's got access to their information that they're doing. But how? No. Not good, Cotton. Not good. And they try to get Kogami involved, so he heard all of that. Oh my God. Yeah. You're perceptive, Gino. Kagari, you go first. We'll take turns questioning. He's like, okay. And don't forget to use Komi says hollow avatar when you start talking. Yeah, so we can see all this on the screen. He's been following along with all of them. Oh my God. Huh. Yeah. In the teacher's lounge, listening to everything. Dear God. So yeah. So then Shogo confronts Oryou and is like, hey, look, I couldn't help but notice that your crimes all look kind of the same. You're kind of sloppy. What's the deal? He's like, if the academy doesn't take action, they're going to have to answer to parents. Do you not see like what a problem this is going to be? And you're sitting there while we're being investigated, painting pictures of decapitated girls' heads. Do you think doing this out in the open's cute? You're getting a little arrogant here, getting a little cocky. Like everything's really easy to talk about here. And she says, what do you think of our education policy? And he's like, well, it's out of date. but I guess there's value in its rareness. Shogo would find value in its rareness because he likes things to be a little more traditional. He doesn't like the modern status quo. And she says it's because the parents want their daughters to receive an education in an old-style environment in this day and age. It's the only choice they have. Chastity and grace, traditional values that have been lost. They compromise the educational ideology of this academy. Their priorities that are not valued in boys, only in girls. And at that point, Shogo's like, "Oh, you're a brawl burner? Well, you gotta go." No, I don't think that's true. She does bring up a point here about how, and yeah, he does kind of like, is like, this is a little pedestrian for me. Because she says, having them instilled upon us, we're shipped out as a brand name product, refined, sheltered maidens, and purchased by men who seek a classic piece of furniture called a good wife and mother in a formality known as marriage. Like, suddenly she's no longer like, she's that student in Shogo's philosophy class that's like spouting off all this stuff, and he's like, "Oh, you're still on chapter 1? I thought you'd be to chapter 5 by now." Like, he just suddenly, you can tell by his body language and the way he looks at her, he's like, "Oh, this is as far as we're going. We're just going to talk about like some feminist ideals and that's it. We're not going to, it's not about changing society as a whole." But it's, I feel like Shogo, what makes him an interesting villain is that he's not infallible, and his philosophy is kind of like self-righteous in the sense that it's him against the world, him against society, and all of the people that he works with in some ways kind of like sort of feeds into that belief that he has about society. And in this moment, her beliefs are not lining up with his about society. She's viewing it more from a feminist perspective and is thinking of just the culture of the academy and all of this. And Shogo's like, we're not really on the same page, are we? And I think at that point, when he realizes they're not on the same page, he's kind of over it. Mm-hmm. And at that point decides that she doesn't want to use her anymore. And the fact that he can be like that he can be in a position to like grow tired of people, is something that's like a quality of his villainy, right? They're rough stones waiting to be polished and finished up, even though there are other ways in which they could bloom. And he says, once you finish your new work, where are you going to exhibit it? And at that point, he's like, you're going to be sloppy, and you're going to lead them to the very place where all of the stuff's going down. You're going to basically reveal your hand. And he's like, that's not going to work. Where would be good? I have to find a lively place that attracts many people's attention. And yeah, just the look on Shogo's face, he's done with her. Like, at that moment, he was over her. Nope. So the little cleaner robots are back. And there's 2 more people that have disappeared, which is a problem. And they've completely gone missing. So like, well, now what do we do? And so what is interesting is the camera work here in this academy is really hard to figure out. But Cho's also a hacker. So chances are Cho has been working with Shogo to make sure that the people can't find them in the system. So yeah, they're like, and they basically come to the conclusion that this place could be where the stuff is going down. Meanwhile, I really like, we go back to Kogami and Akane. She's like, I don't like the cigarette smoke when we're in close quarters. She's like, can you stop smoking, please? I think it'd be interesting if as the story goes on, as the series goes on, if Kogami starts to smoke less and less around her and starts to be less like Sasayama and more like his old self again. That would be rather interesting. I don't know. But he talks about how the victims are different and how he thinks that it's not the same. One interesting thing, though, like the one guy that dies, the part of his brain that plays a part in memory was inserted into his anus, like putting his mind, like, you know, being like, put your foot in your mouth, you know, your head up your ass, like it's one of those situations. I like that Kane's like, She has a very, like, she doesn't really respond to any of the horrific stuff he tells her. She has a very clinical view of everything. She's like, imagine that. And he's like, Sasayama was killed suggesting this too, but the culprit then wanted the ways he killed and exhibited the bodies to convey a message. This one's lacking originality. It's not the same as the others. The setup is boring. Yeah, what he's saying is the previous killer tried to, like, tell messages through his murders, and these are not telling any messages. They're just picking a nice, pretty location, but they're not connecting back to the previous killer. There's nothing that suggests that it's the same person. The crimes just look similar. So, and he says to Toma, killing people was just about preparing materials. So he was the person that put them together. Up until that point, it's the same in the current murder case. So Toma is kind of like the person that was supplying the plastic that's being used, right? And so, what do they talk about here? They bring this other guy up. They say he's whoever's highly intelligent has been assigned to a job with high income under the Sybil system. But we find out it's a woman later, so they keep calling it a man when we find out later it's one of the students. And so Kogami and Akane are like, well, he's like, you just come with me and I'll show you where we're going to find our answers at. So they go to the Tokurazawa Correction and Rehabilitation Center. Now again, we get so much world building in this episode because they basically say the Correction and Rehabilitation Center, this place, he's like, is it your first time coming here? You'd have no other reason to come, wouldn't you? There's like nobody in the parking lot. Once you or Gino decide that I'm useless, then I'll be thrown in here and will never be able to leave again. So this place is fascinating because it's considered a rehabilitation center. No, nobody leaves. It's like once you're here, you stay here. And it's essentially like just a prison, but is literally a gas chamber. Like he says, if they decide that you are no longer needed or you try to escape, they will literally ignite gas in here and kill you. Oh. Which is fascinating, right? Because it's just like, wait a minute. This society that's all like, oh, no violence or nothing, but yep, we're going to ask an expert in the field about this. From this point, the patients are all people with crime coefficients of 300 or more. And so there's at least 211 by what's on there. We see the guy with all the dolls, just some guy with a hookah. The guy with the hookah, what did he do? He got too high? Is he too addicted? What was his crime? What? I like also that in this prison, they don't strip the criminals of their vices. Like the one guy's in the room with all the dolls. The one guy has the hookah. However they ended up there, that it's like they give them that vice to like hold them over until the end of days. There's a guy with a whole room full of books. In case of emergencies, a poisonous gas is released through the vents. And this place can be turned into an execution chamber at any time. And she's like, oh, so we're just going to go deeper into it. Great. That's terrifying. Even if these guys could go outside, they immediately get an execution verdict by the dominators and end up as mincemeat. So it's basically like you just live out the rest of your days in this isolated exile. But what qualifies as a good existence? He's like, well, at least they can stay alive here, but what is the value? What is the value of life at that point, right? So then we go to this one guy who's freaking cool. He looks like a titan, the way this makeup is. And he says, oh, hi, doggy. Like, I like his character already. You've done a lot of drawings on your... He's like, I bet adding them to your back is tough even for you. So they're all tattoos. He's like, my body's flexible. Oh, I love it. It's like, if I have a mirror, I can do it on my back. Oh my God. So yeah. He's like, I'm not interested in a world that doesn't show an understanding of art. So he's not been watching the news. And Kogami is like, shows him the picture of the bodies. And gives the listings. And he's like, oh, they're pretty good. That's exactly like Roichi Oryou. Yeah, I love just like the tattooed bodies and everything. It's so fascinating. And he has like all the dark room with all the artwork and everything and like the tattoo kits. He's like, doesn't it look the same? And I like that as Akane is pointing out that the daughter is there. I like that you see like the one guy with the tattoos like looking at her, his head tilted sideways. And then suddenly we see Kogane, like Kogami just walking around. And I love that poor Masaoka's like, oh shit. And those girls get freaked out when they realize they've been talking to this old man. And then, yeah, he just goes right in and confronts Oryou. And then her crime coefficient's 472, which is the highest it's been this entire series so far. So I was like, oh, hers is ridiculously high, and she's being freaking calm as a cucumber. Oh my God, right? Like, it was higher than the guy that was, like, assaulting someone in the first episode. Like that at that point it's like, oh shit, no. And she manages to run away, and Cho helps her escape. And like, did Mr. Makishima already arrange this as well? And he's like, yes. So again, it was just to get them there, get them talking, so he could infiltrate and like plant bugs and be able to hear their conversations. Genius. How is it hard to find one girl? So yeah, even where they're at in the security rooms, he already had it bugged to listen in on them, right? And he's like, how did you find such an artist existed? And rather than admit that they went and saw the guy with the tattoos, Akane's like, oh no, it's just about originality. He figured it out all by himself. I'm like, Akane, you are covering for Kogami. You are covering for him. You are covering for him and his lies, girl. What? But yes, and so he's like, Toma would never pick a park twice in a row. And Gino's like, we can't say it's done by these people without circumstantial evidence. And then they're like, oh, what I was waiting on is when they showed all of the images on the screen, I was hoping that we would get a shot of them in the art room, and that we get this, and that Kogami would get to see Shogo's face and be like, look, Gino, it's him. But all we got was the vocal pattern, which was good enough. But that's when they figure out about the lab and the sensor and everything, and they go in and see the artwork. Oh my god. Terrifying. Nope. And the thing about it too is that hers, in all of the artwork that she creates, even though it's disturbing as all get out, it's all beautiful and pretty. And the stuff that Toma, that you murder created, sorry, that they created, it was disgusting and disturbing. So yeah, it hits a little different, right? But then we get Shogo in the classroom, okay? And he's looking on his phone at the footage. There's somebody else in the room with him, but he has earphones, so I guess they can't hear because of that. He's got the earphone in. Oh my god. And he has the equalizer, the Moo player. Damn it. He's got a Zune. And oh no, he has zoomed in on Kogami's face. And he's like, oh, I like you. You're handsome. I like that. I'm like, damn it, no! Shogo's found. This is like, so the scene from episode 1 is definitely taking place in the future. Is taking place in the future. We're just building up to it. Oh my god. Yep. And he's like, oh. And then he's like, oh, Mr. Shibata. So you like music? And he's like, what, am I a plebeian? Do I breathe? Of course. He's like, oh yeah, I'm always looking for new artists. He's like, I enjoy finding new talent. And that's when the people are like, oh my god, there's been bodies found in the basement. And then he just turns right back around and is like, cool, thanks. And like, goes back to like listening to what's going on and then trying to tamper with the evidence. Yep. Oh my god. Insanity, right? I do really like this moment between the one girl and Kunazuka where she like comforts the girl. I felt like it was like a lady lover and lady lover like together, like because the one girl basically admits, she's like, I loved the girl that got killed, but I didn't say anything because I thought, I was thinking all these things that was wrong for me to do. I should have said something. And Kunazuka's like, here, go ahead and cry on my shoulder, but don't do it too long or your hue will get cloudy. The idea that they can't even properly grieve, because if they grieve too much, it will make them seem like a latent criminal, is terrifying. Right? It's terrifying. I'm also very fascinated by Kunizuka after this episode because she seems so soft-hearted, even though Shion has been like, she likes it rough. Again, separating the artist from the art, right? But I'm very curious about Kunizuka now, about her past, because she offers such like a considerate and kind shoulder for that girl to cry on in that moment. So I'm curious. And then we go back to Kogami, where they're talking about all these things that can't be explained. The escape route, the equipment in the basement, where did it all come from? What's going on? There's something going on behind the scenes this time. And that's when Kogami notices that the data has been tampered with. And they managed to get the audio. We can restore the sound. And he says, why'd you choose the students within your school for art. And that's when she says, Mr. Makishima. And Kogami's like, oh. And he reacts a lot more calm than I thought he would. He was just like, oh. And that's it. But then the girl, so that's all we get of him figuring out. So I'm like, you would think he'd look at Gino and be like, Gino, look. Gino, look. It's who I've been talking about the last 3 years. Come on now. And Gino will probably be like, well, we can't know for sure. So then we get the hounds. The hounds of Baskerville. And he's like, and he calls her and she's like, excuse me? Because like the escape route that she went on to get out of there was leading her to the mansion. Oh my God. The escape route he led her on was leading her to that guy's mansion. It was all a trap. Shogo reminds me a lot of Ramsay Bolton from Game of Thrones. Just a wee bit, only a lot more philosophical. But yeah, that's insane. It connected back to the tunnel. Like Shogo had all planned this. And Shogo's like, I'm not leaving anything to be discovered. Shogo's like, I'm not ready for them to figure out who I am yet. So I can't let you spill the beans. Because even though you're a little evil murder child, you also are still a child and you will very much talk. If you have nothing, if there's nothing in it for you, you'll probably betray me. So you gotta go. And him and Sho, he's like, do you realize how you came to disappoint me? And she doesn't. She doesn't get it. She's like, what are you talking about? What on earth did I do? And he's like, if you don't realize, then you can't reflect. Oof. It seems I can't expect any more growth from you. She got stagnant. She got complacent with just killing the girls in the academy. She wasn't looking at any bigger pictures. So he's like, I can't, you're not going to grow. So another failed experiment. I'll just move on to the next. Oh my God. Nope. It's unfortunate. I thought you had a bright future. And he just toys with her. He just like tells her, he just toys with her and just says these horrible things to her right before she's killed. And he's like, there's a line by Tamora, the queen of Goths. And he like shows the light there. Should I rob my sweet sons of their fee? No, let them satisfy their lust on thee. And she's like, oh my God. And that's when she, okay, so they're basically dismembering the sound. Like he used the light thing to like cancel out the Wi-Fi on her phone. Oh my God. So that she couldn't call anybody. Nope. And he says, the hunt is up. The morn is bright and gray. Oh my God. And so like, he's just watching it from afar. He's just watching it all go down. Oh my God. And has a little light there. And then there's these mechanical hounds. What the fudge? As she's running away and steps in the trap. I mean, the fact that she's running through the hallway that you can see like the blood stains on the side of the blood stains on the side of the wall and on the grates. The fudge. Terrifying, y'all. Terrifying. And then, of course, she steps in the trap. And then, meanwhile, the guy, like, puts his hunting cap on. Just seems like a normal fellow. Just getting a gun. Oh, my God. And, yeah, she tried to drag herself away with the bear trap. And tried to call her dad. That's the sickest thing, is that in her final moments, she thought to try to call her dad, who was dead. And the idea that that dog uses, like, its tail to flay her hands. Oh, my God. And so, yeah, he uses, like, Shogo uses the little light so he can read out of his book. And then, yeah, he goes to blow her head off. And he has, like, the night range goggles to see her. And she looks so scared there. And she's like, you're going to be discarded eventually when Mr. Makishima gets bored with you. And of course, that little steering wheel thing is in the way so that we can't see her get her head blown off. And he says, you don't have to worry about that. Oh. And like, it didn't even blow her whole head off, just the top of it. Oh. He says, you were just a fox cub providing entertainment. But just like him, I'm one of the players who enjoy the entertainment. Yeah, he's like, I'm in the same boat as Shogo. I'm just here to be entertained. Oh my god. Oh, her life was beast-like and devoid of pity. Because it kind of was. She didn't care at all for victims. Nope. And so shall have like want of pity. Mm-hmm. And so then Cho's like, well, didn't you like her? Or is it okay that you killed her? And he's like, I found a new man. He's got abs. I found a more interesting toy. He's got an 8-pack and is my personal sexual preference. So we're in a much better boat, Cho. He's like, gather some information for me. But the man who came to the academy, his name is Kogami. And then Cho's like, well, that's quite an unusual guy you got your sights set on. And he's like, yeah. And he's just like, yeah, I know, right, Cho? He's just so handsome and tall and smart, and he's a murderer. He's up my alley. Like the way he just like, the moment that Cho's like, what a guy, huh? And he's just like, I know, right? Oh my god, like I ship Kogami and Akane so much, but then the show gives us this ship. He's like, his insight, his ability to grasp, quite interesting. It sounds like some like place text for a Pokemon gym trainer. Oh my god. And then yeah, he's just like, I get the feeling he'll be very entertaining. I was like, oh my god. Terrifying. Terrifying, y'all. Absolutely terrifying. So yeah, do I think that it is rather interesting that we're talking about, it seems that Shogo's character has a fixation on this whole stress care thing, and the idea about that we've taken mental health to the extreme, to the point where we are basically causing a disease from de-stressing ourselves too much and trying to eliminate all stress from our life, which is sadly kind of true in a way in our own time. Like there's this weird dichotomy where we are very smartly, I feel, aware of mental health, but then we've gotten to the point where I see this in my students, like they can't handle stress at all, and so they try to avoid it at all costs. But because they try to avoid stress at all costs, it gets to the point where they don't do anything. Because they're so afraid something will go wrong and it'll cause stress, they're not active in anything. And so I'm like, man, it's kind of true. And I'm like, that's so messed up, right? That it's even a thing. It's so messed up. But yeah, so Shogo has a big old vendetta against the stress care system. And the thing about it is, like I said, Shogo has some really good points. It's just the whole fostering a murder system that's messed up. Meanwhile, Kogami seems pretty chill, despite, suddenly being... I was expecting him when Shogo was brought up and Mikishima was brought up, I was expecting Kogami to freak out. I was expecting to be a lot more, troubled and hyper about everything, but he's actually really calm and serene, and I don't know how to feel about that. It feels kind of like Akane, which again is like, how do we feel about that? And then we're getting more of the world building. We're getting more of the idea that Shogo is like Moriarty the Patriot with his murder network. So that's interesting. There's just a lot of really cool world building in this episode. But the idea that Shogo is very willing to just ditch you as soon as you are of no use to him, or as soon as you stop growing and become stagnant, it's something. So I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, what you all think about this episode. I really enjoyed it, but I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Psycho-Pass. Bye! Why should we be surprised that we have lots to talk about?